Hi everyone, thank you for joining this session on shifts in global crime. I'm delighted today to be joined by two fabulous panellists. I'm Madeline Howard, a director of CyNam and socio-technical manager at Cyber. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hi, Raj Samani, McAfee Fellow, Chief Scientist. Also advise the European Cybercrime Centre on Internet Security.
And Charlie?
Yeah, hi, Charlie McMurdy, 32 years law enforcement, where latter part of my career, after dealing with robberies and murders and such like, and drugs and covert policing and counterterrorism, then set up the National Cybercrime Capability for Law Enforcement, which transposed into the National Crime Agency, where it now sits, most of the capability. And then after law enforcement, 4 years with PwC as their senior cybercrime advisor. And now I do some advisory and public speaking roles.
Awesome. So I think if we're talking about, shifts in cybercrime, it's probably a good idea to set the scene. And this year's been challenging for all sorts of reasons, not only because we're all on board the Corona coaster that's giving us drops and twists and turns. But Raj, what would you say has been a defining moment this year in terms of cybercrime or cybersecurity?
Okay, so there's been quite a lot happen this year. And, for me, I think one of the most telling moments kind of began probably towards the end of February. So, I actually ended up damaging my Achilles and I was in hospital. So I did nothing but watch the news for about 2 weeks. And I'm sitting there watching the news, seeing literally the spread of this particular virus. And at the same time, we saw announcements from, I think it was the Maze Group and Doppelpaymer, who basically said, we as ransomware operators aren't going to be going after the health sector. And to be honest, I kind of believed it. And the one thing that I really realized for me, which was by about the middle of March, we saw such a volume in attacks. I mean, I'll give you an example. On the 26th of March, there were like 100,000 domains registered with either corona or virus or pandemic. And a lot of these were kind of low-level fraudsters. But, for me, what this really shows is the misconception, and you may have seen one particular ransomware group talking about giving money back to charity, but the misconception that there's a Robin Hood element to this, the misconception that cybercrime in some way, shape, or form is somewhat detached from everyday society, I think no longer holds true. And so for me, 2020 has been a year of just the realization of the real life impact that cyber, and I hate the word cyber, right? But the real world impact that cyber can have on people, from disabling hospitals to stealing or trying to steal vaccine or intellectual property, to just this low psychological barrier that's required to carry out digital crime. Because of course, most people aren't going to go out and mug somebody on the street, but clicking on a button seems to be quite easy. For me, that's what 2020 really represents.
Charlie, what about you? What's been your defining moment? Something that's really made you take stock and go, yeah, crikey, where are we at?
Yeah, I suppose kind of echoing Raj there, it's, everything has moved online. One of the buzz sort of lines that I used back in law enforcement was, IT, cyber is an integral part of everything that we do, and it needed to be an integral part of law enforcement capability. So it's that sort of transition, sort of where everybody now is living online. And all the opportunities, there are opportunities, but all the issues that brings with it, whether that is, making yourself more of a target with remote working, less security around your home environment, online transactions, more time shopping online rather than going down the high street, more liable to scams. And something that, the charity that we're doing some work for here today, just all the children doing all their schoolwork online and communicating with their friends online, and the issues that brings with a lot of the, the pressures and the bullying and the isolation that children face. So, pros and cons with now really living our complete lives online, rather than moving to, you know, when the good old-fashioned days when we used to go into the office and rely on the security around the office environment and be able to walk away from IT to a certain degree when we came home. There is no walking away now.
What do you think are the risks associated with IoT? And do you actually think it's beneficial, or we need to actually, you know, scroll it back a bit and think, actually, we don't need to be as interconnected?
So something I always like the phrase, you know, is it fit for purpose? Is that person fit for purpose? And that was always a challenge with, you know, cyber staff, cyber investigators. Are they fit for purpose? Who says that they're, you know, they've got the right qualities and qualifications? When we look at devices that are now having tech embedded in them, and a lot of devices that were never intended to go, you know, to be plugged into your network, whether it's, you know, the silly killer toaster, or, you know, things like the fax machine and, you know, the IoT, the kettle that is now online. All these devices are built for their primary function without having that security consideration embedded in them.
Definitely. Raj, what are your thoughts? IoT, keep connecting, or we need to go back to basics and scroll it back a little bit?
We worry about cyber criminals, quite rightly, but we're happy to go on social network platforms and give away our lives. And, you know, Madeline, sorry, I'm going to, you know, like if you look behind you, you've got a Sonos Play, is that the Play 1 or the Play 3, right? And
yeah.
And look, you know, that's a really good example there, because, like, have you read the privacy policy from Sonos? Because actually they do gather information about your listening habits. And actually I think it was like about a year ago, they actually made the announcement that they're going to brick all of the old devices to force you to upgrade. Well, you know, we don't, you know, we make this assumption that all we should be worried about are, you know, the cyber criminals or nation states or whatever. But like, the reality is big businesses are also going out there and gathering all this information about us and then turning it around and using it to try and sell us more crap. So we've got to recognize that like hidden within these terms of service, there's outrageous kind of demands for information. And like, you know, and I'll tell you, like, at home, we always have this debate where, you know, my girls come to me and say, Dad, can I install this free screensaver app, or can I download this particular game and stuff? And, you know, I'll always end up sitting down and going through the policies or going through the terms of service, and then going on places like Mumsnet, for example, where, you know, mums have actually raised concerns about some games. And, you know, that's the reality of the world we live in, is that you are a commodity. You are nothing more than just, you know, lines of text or a debit card number or a credit card number. You know, like I'll tell you, like I always have this debate with my kids, which is like, do you really need to give away that information? And you know, I remember once, like, you know, we went away on holiday, and, you know, we were signing up for something, and my daughter was like 6, and they said, oh, you know, can you tell me, you know, what you do for a living? And I just lied and I made something up. She said, no, Daddy, you don't do that. You actually work for McAfee. And I was like, yeah, okay. And I had to explain to her afterwards that, look, they didn't need to know that information. And I think, you know, IoT is a concern, and, you know, we've demonstrated model hacking against the Tesla. We did model hacking against facial recognition systems. We recently compromised heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. And that's a concern, but equally what's probably more worrying for me is the 75 devices that we have in our home. What do they know about me? And how are they using that in order to be able to target me with personalized advertisements, or who are they selling that to? So
yeah, I think that's, you know, the more we connect things, the more information that devices and companies have about us. You know, if that information is leaked, sold, you know, that's a lot of information that's about you that, again, if into the wrong hands, can be used for social engineering attacks. And the more that we share online, the easier it kind of gets for criminals to build up this bigger picture. So just kind of changing discussion, you know, we've seen, when it comes to social engineering attacks, a rise in phishing, voice phishing. You know, there was the big Twitter hack earlier this year where they'd used voice phishing to gain access. Do you think that, you know, into next year or in the next 5 years, that we're going to see cyber criminals use artificial intelligence more for social engineering scams? Or do you think actually we have the kind of step ahead of the cyber criminals in terms of using artificial intelligence for the right reasons?
I don't, this is going to sound really awful. I mean, cyber criminals aren't that smart. I'm going to regret saying that, but what I mean by that is they don't need to be that smart.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're going to buy, I don't know, 20,000 PPE masks from like the dark web, then why the hell do we need to sit down and develop machine learning algorithms to go out and do specific targeting? They don't need to be that clever. Like, we did, and if you saw Operation North Star, which was a nation state related campaign targeting the defense and aerospace industry, and they used social networking and people's desire to look for new jobs as the initial entry vector. And so they were using the psychological principles of, authority and scarcity to socially engineer themselves onto the network. And so, like, if we're going to fall for those types of scams, I mean, if we're going to go and buy PPE from the dark web and go, oh, it didn't turn up, I wonder why that was, then why on earth do they need to do model hacking against like cars or any other types of devices? Because we're giving it to them anyway, so why bother investing?
So do you think that actually we sometimes think we put a bit of emphasis that the cyber criminals are always going to be one step ahead of us, but actually as an industry we are doing the right things to make sure that they're not ahead of us? Because I think sometimes we think actually whatever we do as an industry, they're always gonna think of something that we haven't thought of. Charlie, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, so, I mean, it goes back to, we have ethics,
Mm-hmm.
we have policies and processes, and we have budgets. Within law enforcement, you've got legislation. So we are bound by certain terms in how we operate within industry or law enforcement, whatever environment. The bad guys, and I agree with Raj, more often than not, they're not that clever. They're not that sophisticated in what they're doing, but they don't have those boundaries. They don't have that ethical consideration. They don't have that legislation that they have to follow, or that, the financial, the budget, the approval that they need to adhere to. So, it's easy when something new comes on the market, that's the hot topic that the cyber guys will go after and try and hack and have fun with. Or, they'll be constantly looking at new ways of, doing, whether it's deep fake, tech, or playing with the internet and how they can commit crime or just have fun. So I think, when you say, are they one step ahead of us or are we ahead in the game? They have less barriers to adhere to in trying different, tools and techniques. But I think, industry is getting wise to the right direction, how we need to go about working together, sharing intelligence, developing appropriate systems, starting to safeguard our data. I think where the big gap in all this exists is probably in the end user, as always. We can develop the most secure, the safest environment, and if you haven't got the right end user who pushes a button or leaves a device on the train or plugs something in that they shouldn't plug in, or clicks on that phishing link, that's our biggest weakness and vulnerability. So,
and that kind of ties into, where does the responsibility lie? Because we don't want to say to individuals, if you click on a link, that's your fault. And as an industry, we want to make sure that people feel confident and they understand the technologies that they're using. But Raj, where do you think actually does responsibility lie with law enforcement? Is it organizations, individuals? Is it departments? It's hard for us to say where's the blame if it goes wrong, but who is responsible for making sure that we do live in a secure society?
Well, so I think to an extent we've made our lives difficult for ourselves. The truth is my mum doesn't know what I do, even today. And, I remember once, we actually did some work with law enforcement. There was a takedown of criminal infrastructure. We developed a stinger tool that will help victims to run that particular tool and remove the malware. I mean, it was going to our sinkhole, so they were safe anyway. And I remember my mum calls me up and she goes, yeah, I've downloaded the virus. Now what do I do? And, you know, I kind of laughed. I went, ha, 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 you know, you're so dumb. You don't know what you're talking about. I didn't say that, but, you know, it's kind of what I thought. And then it made me realize, it's like, well, look, like this is the average person out on the street, and they have such a lack of understanding about what's going on. And, you know, to an extent, I think we've perpetuated the issue where we turn around and we'll say, well, it's a cyber crime issue, but it's not. I mean, like Charlie will tell you, like, sorry, Charlie, I'm speaking for you, but like,
Yeah,
it's
no,
crime.
no.
But it's crime. That's what it is. You know, if a hospital can't treat patients, whether it's a cyber-related issue or not, that's the reality of what happens. And I think, you know, to an extent, I think we've got to be reflective of ourselves as an industry and say, you know, have we made this concept of digital crime accessible to people? Because if you ask my parents, well, you know, I'm going to steal your car, they'll say to you, well, these are the bad things that's going to happen. They can't get to work. But if I turn around and say, well, you know, we stole intellectual property from this particular company, they're like, well, what does that mean? And ultimately, you know, we can't answer that question because, you know, we don't know the opportunity lost and all these other things. And so we've been so focused on pointing the fingers at specific countries or just looking at the malware, but we actually need to try and explain what the impact is. Then I think we can get society to work with us in terms of trying to prevent the issue. So I think it's all of us, but I think it really begins with us as an industry.
I don't think, you know, working from home isn't going to change in 2021. It's probably something we're all going to become accustomed to. Do you think that more industries have felt the pain of working from home more? Do you think it's opened up more risks, or do you think it's been beneficial for organisations to kind of have that emphasis of security and looking at it at the individual level? Raj, what do you think?
I mean, to an extent, it's been a car crash, really. So we actually analysed in January. We looked at the number of open RDP connections out on the internet, and so RDP's been the kind of the modus operandi for post-intrusion ransomware groups like Maze and Ryuk and others. And then we looked at it kind of in March, and the number had almost doubled. Wow. And that's openly accessible via the internet. And actually, I need to probably check where we are today. And guess what? We are in August, and actually, no, we're not in August, are we? Gosh, there's Groundhog Day. We are now in October, nearly in November now, right? And you kind of look at this and you go, well, actually, how many cases of ransomware have we read about where major companies have gone offline by these post-intrusion ransomware crews? I mean, the average ransomware payment is $160,000. Last quarter, it was $110,000. You know, so like, is it working? I mean, the answer is fairly evident in the fact that in the rush to maybe go online, organizations are leaving the back door open, and you know, it's not the most difficult thing to do to lock that particular port down. And so, I mean, the answer is there in the data. And the answer is there on Twitter, like you, or on Bleeping Computer, or you go to the register, or look at the number of cases that we're seeing. Yeah, we've seen examples where some companies are being demanded in excess of $10 million for ransomware. Mm-hmm. Now, when we co-founded No More Ransom, I mean, when we begun down this path, it was like $200, and now we're talking about $10 million ransoms. And so the evidence is very clear.
Mm-hmm. Charlie, what about your thoughts?
Ransomware is a lovely crime. It's just, it goes back to that. It's so easy to cause so much catastrophic harm to organizations. Putting ransomware and all the cyber guys making merry at the moment. But I do think that some good has come out of the shift to everybody working from home and doing schoolwork at home. I dread to think if we didn't have tech and COVID had hit, and we didn't have that degree of capability to deliver lessons online and move a lot of our staff to work from home, where would we be then? So yeah, loads of issues, loads of problems, it is a shift that I think, I don't think we'll ever fully revert back to everybody will just pack up and move back to the offices. Certainly, I know, a lot of companies have seen the benefits of working from home with staff, and certainly from a people perspective, great degree of benefits. Even, a lot of law enforcement colleagues that are now, office workers that are working from home, saving on that travelling time, using police infrastructure in their home environment. So, there's pros and cons. I do worry about some parts of the community that haven't got that tech opportunity and capability. Raj mentioned, his parents, a lot of the elderly, a lot of non-IT individuals, older generations, and also, a lot of kids that haven't got, umpteen laptops in the family. If you've got 3 or 4 children all trying to share, never mind share, devices, but that internet connectivity that I've had to, this morning run round, and we've got PlayStations turned off and Xboxes turned off and all sorts of things. So, there's a few challenges with working from home, but there's an awful lot of benefits as well out there.
Yeah, I'd say for me, the kind of silver lining is that my family have paid a bit more attention to what I actually do as a job, and so they've actually learned some really good stuff along the way, because you're chatting over dinner about what you've been up to, and so actually when things have come along, whether they wanted to listen or not, they've listened to me talking to them. I feel like they've actually, potentially has positively benefited them. So just to wrap up with, what, Raj, we'll start with you. What would be your threat prediction for 2021? 30 seconds. What would you say we need to look out for? What was your individual threat prediction?
Actually, so I'm going to change the question, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Like, what's the one thing that people need to be doing in 2021 that they're not doing today? And I would say, look, the most important thing that we need to do, as a community, is we need to be more supportive of one another. Let's look at places like social media as a vehicle, not to maybe go after each other or to flame each other, but maybe to promote better research, to collaborate on new findings. For me, that's one thing I would like the community to do. From a society perspective, I would love somebody to turn around to a manufacturer of a car and say, I'm not going to buy that because I'm not convinced about your vulnerability disclosure policy. Do you support third-party research? Like, if we can get people to start asking that question, I think the market will change this concern we have about IoT.
Bit more critical thinking. That's good in kind of all aspects of life, isn't it? Just to think a bit more critically and challenge things. Charlie, what about you? What's your 2021 advice, threat prediction? Spin it how you want.
I guess the same sort of thing, really. Just think about security. Think about, what you're doing online, what you're giving away online, what you're actually sharing online. So I think, great opportunities. We're doing far more, collaborative engagements, whether it's for family or whether it's for work. But just think around the security issues and aspects. And, if you're engaging with those, whether it's youngsters or elders that aren't as aware as other people, then, just try and feed some of those security sort things in. So just to try, and it goes back to who's responsible and who's liable. If we can all up our game to a certain degree, it's going to make things a lot better in the future.
Fabulous. Well, thank you both so much for joining me. That was really.
Hang on, Madeline, you didn't tell us yours. You didn't tell us.
Oh, right, yeah. Well, I'm going to say, actually, I agree with you both that actually for 2021, I think as a community, we need to carry on sharing advice and guidance with one another, but actually penetrate beyond the community. I think there's often a tendency just to share things amongst ourselves, but actually engaging with grandparents, your neighbours, people outside of the industry, your everyday individuals, because they're the people who are probably engaging with lots of technology far more. I think it's actually, how do we engage the whole of society, not just the people who we think engage with tech through work, but in their personal life as well.
Just on that, I mean, that rings so true. If you speak to any cyber criminals, or when you're sort of debriefing them, interviewing them, the one thing that rings out is they love talking about what they do and how they do it, and they share their tips and techniques amongst their communities, and that's how they sort of move up and step up their game. So, you know, they'll say how they managed to hack this or how they've found a vulnerability on that. So, you know, to a certain degree, we need to echo the bad guys.
Yeah.
We need to be talking more, sharing more, working better collaboratively. So, yeah, I completely echo that.
2021, collaboration is key. We can have that as a motto. Yeah, no, fab. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope everyone who's watching this has enjoyed the session and you enjoy the rest of the content that the Cyber House Party team have pulled together. They've done a fantastic job. Make sure you do donate to the two wonderful charities and engage with everyone else within the community. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Fred.
Thanks, Madeline.